We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
News that didn't quite go under the radar this week, but was surprising to many, was that the No Labels vehicle, which threatened to run a unity candidate in the 2024 election, decided to close up shop. But they'll still be working on other projects, I'm sure. But they quoted as their reason that they couldn't find a candidate. Now, reading into that, they couldn't find a unity candidate. We're back with Tim Donner, Liberty Nation's senior political analyst and longtime host of this here show. And Tim, I'd love to get your opinion on why they couldn't find a unity candidate.
Well, they tried, by most accounts, something like 30 different potential candidates, and every single one of them turned them down. Now, why? Number one, I think, is the clear idea that they had no chance to win. Number two, that anybody from either party joining that movement would be ostracized for the rest of their political career. And you've got to throw in number three, the Democratic Party, for one, was not hesitant in releasing so-called private memos, threatening anybody that, was dancing to any degree with the No Labels movement or any kind of independent candidacy. So, the No Labels movement itself went through several iterations. Yeah. The first was a hopeful, hey, people want something different than Biden and Trump, and these people can get ballot access and they can provide it. And then it was a mortal threat to Joe Biden, because it looked like Joe Manchin would be the guy, and he's the bookend to Joe Biden in the Democratic Party. Then they thought it might be someone like a Larry Hogan, who's an anti-Trump Republican, former governor of Maryland. And it kept changing and changing. And then Robert F. Kennedy Jr. became an independent instead of a Democrat. So by the time that No Labels said, sorry, we just can't really get anyone who's willing to do this, it seems to me clearly that it's to Trump's advantage, because with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. going leftward with his vice presidential
Nicole Shanahan,
who is a self-proclaimed progressive. What you have now is you have 4 left-of-center candidates on the ballot and 1 Republican, Donald Trump. So by No Labels deciding not to field a candidate, what that means is the Nikki Haley wing, the anti-Trump wing of the Republican Party, and moderates, the so-called double haters who hate Trump and Biden, they have no place to go. So yeah. I think that this clearly benefits Donald Trump in the end, if only on the margins.
Absolutely. Now, I had a theory on why the No Labels effort collapsed, and it's more speaking to the tune of it. And I wrote about this on libertynation.com. And as you know, you've read the piece.
Really, I think it's an analysis I haven't read anywhere else, and I agree with it completely. So,
thank you,
Professor. Teach us.
So that use professor like Dr. Jill uses it, right?
Yeah, no, please no.
My theory here is that nobody wants a unity candidate now, because there's so much rancor, there's so much to be sorted out within the country, that unity is not something for this election. And I've kind of been thinking more on that since writing the piece. And in my mind, tell me what you think of this. I think that if Donald Trump loses in this November, then the right wing of American politics will go away and say that, okay, this form of Trumpism, this America First thing, it's not working. We couldn't make it in 2 elections. We need to reform as a centrist party. And then they'll run straight down the center of politics and they'll win in 2028. Or, Joe Biden loses, and then the left wing of the country, they go away and think, well, we couldn't compete with all these with the right, because we've got all these far left policies, as the progressive stuff as we talked about earlier. And then they'll basically reform and come back dead in the center. And the center will win. Either way, the center will win come 2028.
Well, there are a couple of particularly prominent examples of this in recent political history. In 1972, when George McGovern ran against Richard Nixon, who was seeking a second term, I mean, he was so far out on the left, he actually lost the election by 24% in the popular vote. He was termed the candidate of abortion, acid, and I'm trying to remember what the third one was, but it was not complimentary.
Sure.
And so it was a disastrous year for the Democratic Party. Now, admittedly, there was Watergate in between, but in 76, they went hard to the center with Jimmy Carter. And the same thing happened after Michael Dukakis was just destroyed in the 1988 election by George H.W. Bush. The Democratic Party headed straight for the center with Bill Clinton, and he won 2 terms. So there's plenty of precedent for a party that loses a shattering, definitive, defining election, which this will be for probably both parties, to regroup and reform and present a different image going forward. I would suspect that if Trump loses, we would see Nikki Haley rise to prominence because she was second in line and she outlasted, all the men other than Trump. And that's sort of a bit of a back to the future, back to the George W. Bush era of neoconservatism.
1987 called. They want their policies back.
But I don't think that the party will ever quite return to the neoconservative days of the early 2000s, the first decade of the 2000s.
Yeah, it seems to me that there were no lessons to be learned in 2016 or 2020 because the margins were so close. So there wasn't, let's go away, regroup, and rethink our strategy. Everything was just so close. The Democratic Party was still reeling from not having Hillary Clinton as their president. And
I think it's safe to say that in 2016 and in 2020, the losers and the winners in both, none of them were satisfied that the outcome was real.
I'd say that's a fair assessment. Tim Donner, thanks ever so much for joining us.
Always a pleasure, Mark. Thanks.